Let's go!
I got another tweet that we got to pull up and a thing we got to talk about because I feel like something happened where people forgot. To be real, this whole conversation of like the MVC2 talk started when I promoted the idea that this game didn't exactly pop off super hard when it came out. This is the thing that I want to talk about. And this kind of blows people's minds. Just to break it down, and I think we appropriately need music in the background for this because this isn't just a music thing. This is an MVC2 thing, an early 2000s thing. Hear that? Wow. What is that? That's the sounds of one of the most unique, varied, and vastly different fighting game soundtracks of all time. And what if I told you that when Marvel vs. Capcom 2 first hit the scene in the early 2000s, the first week it was out in the arcades, what if I told you everybody hated it? Despised it, actually. What if I told you that even my friends that have played Marvel 2 and love Marvel 2 way more than I do, Steve, still hates the music? I promoted an idea that MVC2, when it first came out, was not initially a beloved game. It got harsh criticisms of its visuals, its music, its asset reusage, its buttons, and a lot of people thought it was lazy. In the first month, I felt the same way. As a Marvel vs. Capcom 1 fan, I felt the same way. But over time, that would not last, and time has only elevated Marvel 2. Very true. Just to promote the idea, the whole 3D era of Capcom fighting games, and I quote 3D, where the backgrounds were 3D, the characters were 2D, MVC2 was the first real game to do that. They kind of did it in CVS1, but no, MVC2 was the first one where it's like, yo, bro, there is an entire like moving background that is 3D and we're going through it and shit, and it's transforming and morphing. That is not the same thing in CVS1. For the first time, MVC2 was going to have 2D artwork and 3D backgrounds. And guess what everyone's initial perspective was when it hit arcades those first couple of days when we had been playing Marvel 1 and X-Men vs. Street Fighter for so many years? It looks like shit. And then we listen to the music and it sounds nothing like Street Fighter music. It sounds nothing like traditional Capcom music from the CPS era. It sounds weird and goofy. And it sounds like shit. And look at the roster. There's all these characters. There's 2 versions of Wolverine in here, dude. What is going on? The roster is just an asset dump from every other game they've had. Man, the worst roster. What the hell's going on? This was the perspective of early 2000s gaming. It was different and it was weird. We did not look at Marvel vs. Capcom 2 like it was effectively the Elden Ring of the MVC series. All we saw was like asset reusage and new funky music, and like this was the big one. This was the one where I was a 16, 17-year-old and I put my foot down. Here's where I put my foot down on MVC2 in the first week. I'm rock solid about my decision as a 16-year-old. No one should ever be taking anything I say seriously. My opinion should not be shared with anybody. I am a teenager, but I felt that you decrease the buttons in a Capcom fighting game to 4 buttons. 4 buttons, 2 assist buttons. We lost 2 attacks with this shit. You piece of shit bitches. This MVC2 game is trash. We're gonna go play the big boy game not made for babies, which is Marvel 1. And we did. We legit did. There was a herd of people, of other stupid teenagers that stuck around with Marvel 1 for as long as we possibly could until, no, this game's actually kind of cool. You know? So again, when MVC2 first came out, this was not an alien mentality. This was definitely shared over like local fighting game groups and stuff like that, that this game was not what people really wanted. It was just sort of like a mishmash and a goddamn gobbledygook of all this crazy shit that Capcom had been brewing over the past like 6 years, and they just threw it all to one game with not a care in the world, you know? Don't get me wrong, it would not last, because our minds would get changed on this shit as you actually play it, because as fans, we see something new and something different, and you immediately jump in it as in it's stupid and it's dumb and I don't like it. And again, like I say, comparatively, MVC2 was like the fucking Elden Ring of the Marvel vs. Capcom series. It just took everything that they had done before and just jammed it into one thing. But the music especially, and I think over time, and especially in the early 2000s, it was very popular to hate things. And I feel like even more so than nowadays. Here's the crazy part. This mentality carries over to another specific game that I think fans of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 will 100% agree with. Did y'all just forget the first couple months of Marvel 3? What some of the top players, the biggest heads of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 were saying about Marvel 3 when that came out? I don't even want to say some of it. It's bad, dude. It was scathing. Marvel 3 was like an inferior game, an absolutely inferior game that nobody's gonna like. Now it's like one of the most beloved fighting games of all time. So is MVC2, one of the most beloved fighting games of all time. This is not a unique thing at all to fighting games, man. The majority of brand new fighting games are not well received by the audience that came before it. Most people do not like new things, and there are good reasons for this. Number one, resetting your skill, right? Skill reset is a big thing that players that dedicate a huge amount of their lives to one specific game have to deal with. That the skill that translates from one game to the next will not carry over. I held an animosity towards Street Fighter 4 because nothing I learned in Third Strike really carried over to Street Fighter 4. And it was like, man, like what the, we have to learn a completely new fucking game. This feels weird. And that was the first time I dedicated a huge part of my life to learning Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, you know? This isn't a weird thing. I do think the unique thing about MVC2 is that, yes, at the time, as you're reading on the screen from major review sites of the early 2000s, it was not initially received super well. But a lot of things over time grow to the point where it doesn't even matter what that initial reception was. I will also like to remind you, a little game called Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 came out and sold 50,000 copies in its first month. It was brutal. The game bombed. Arguably 5 times harder than MVCI did. Ultimate Marvel 3 specifically. But over time, that game had enough word of mouth and people that loved it so much that that audience managed to expand, and then Ultimate Marvel 3 really got some legs on it. Why was the game not well received at the time? Well, because it was a cheap cash grab from Capcom. It came out within like a year, way less than a year, of the initial version of the game, and there was no clear upgrade path. You have to spend $40 on a whole brand new game. People were big mad. So it took a long time for that like stigma to sort of go away. It took a long time for that to happen. I think MVC2 nowadays, and even over the past 10 years, is widely regarded to be one of the greatest fighting games of all time. I truly believe that. And that isn't just from a perspective of a hardcore player base. That's from the perspective of a casual player base. If we want to say specifically a purchasing audience that goes beyond just hardcore fighting game fans, which is not enough to keep a franchise like this alive, it really isn't. You need to reach an audience that breaks past that. You need to reach an audience that is like an amount of people that have no intention of going that far with this stuff, just love how crazy this game is and how big it is because it elicits memories of that from the past, you know? I don't think any other game in the Marvel vs. Capcom franchise, in all of the Versus series going from Coda to MVCI, I don't think any of them have the impact of MVC2. None of them. MVC2 is the one that has stood the test of time. The soundtrack has only gotten better. The crazy roster and character choices and brand new characters have only gotten more endearing over time. And people love more things of the game than ever before, is what it feels like. It literally aged like fine wine.